Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys for joining today to talk about building effective teams. I'm excited to talk about this topic because it is something that's close to my heart. I like all these things, honestly, leadership development in general. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I would ask you to please, if you have questions, go ahead and post them into the Q&A when you have them. I'll address them at the end when we have time for questions and answers at the end. And if you have additional questions, more, kind of specific to your organization or to you and your teams, please do reach out to me one-on-one. My contact information will be on the last slide. And I'd love to talk with you and connect with you and customize answers to your questions. All right. Awesome. So let's get started. So who am I? My name is Drew Harrell. Obviously, I am a business and leadership coach. I'm the principal and founder of Nyan Leadership. And Nyan means eyes. The idea is the more you're aware of, the more you can actually change. If you're not aware of something, you can't change anything about that. So the whole point of coaching in general is building self-awareness and awareness of your organization and of your team so you can build better, effective organizations and teams. I'm a writer, artist, photographer, serial entrepreneur. I love building things, building companies, building organizations, building people, and then creating art in general, right? Whatever that means. I'm a recovering attorney and former IT consultant. So my background is pretty varied, honestly. And I've seen a lot of different things in my years as a coach and otherwise. I'm also a huge nerd and a dog rescue enthusiast. And I love to explore the world and explore just in general, the world, people, organizations, you name it. Today's intentions, what are we talking about today? We're talking about building effective teams. So we're going to do a quick recap of the cycle of poor management and then the importance of building a culture of feedback, because those do feed into this, believe it or not. And we'll talk about how those feed in specifically. We're also going to talk about understanding team dynamics. How do the teams work together and why do they work the way they work? We'll also discuss the importance of understanding personality and leadership types when you're talking about your teams, because that's going to be one big factor in how your teams work together. We'll talk about team cohesion as well in terms of why that matters. We'll also introduce 4 personality leadership assessments. And the point of that is, again, looking at team building and how you build effective teams using data, not just like whatever you think or whatever you feel, but it's going to be data driven. And that's one of the things we want to talk about specifically around teams. A lot of times people think of personality or soft skills as being qualitative and not really data driven at all, and just like a feeling. But in reality, there is science behind it. There are assessments and things you can look at. We're also going to talk about a bonus one as well, not just the 4, but this will be a 5th as well that we talk about. Again, like I said, this is just scratching the surface. This is a massive, massive topic, just like all these leadership development topics are. They're very large and deep topics. And so it's hard to go into real depth in any of these things. This is just scratching the surface. It's just going to be a very kind of dipping your toe in the water kind of introductory conversation. And again, I encourage you to please reach out to me. Let me know if you want to do a one-to-one to chat more about deeper conversations around these topics. All right. So like I said, we'll start with the review. What is the cycle of poor management? Poor leadership leads to poor culture, right? Poor culture, and that's an organizational level or the team level. And we'll talk about that as we get into it. Poor culture leads to poor work-life balance and then poor satisfaction on the parts of the employees. Then that leads to high turnover. High turnover then leads to rushed hiring because you got to fill those gaps as quickly as possible. And that leads to poor promotion practices in general. That leads to just the organization just suffering as a culture, as a fit. And good people will end up leaving the organization long term. And that's going to be hard to build effective teams when all the good people are gone. Next, in terms of talking about the culture of feedback, there's some opportunities before people leave, right? Create a leadership development program at your organization for people to build leaders, to help your leaders be supported and develop them effectively. Create a culture of feedback at your organization, at the organizational level. Now we're talking, this is just as a review of last week or 2 weeks ago, when we talked about the organizational level and the value of building a culture of feedback in that organization. Today, we're going to talk about that at the team level because it is also there as well. Create effective support practices and leadership practices for your team. You want to make sure also that you have a clear organizational work chart. You're also going to see some of these parallels that happen on the team level as well. So think about it in terms of the macro versus the micro. We'll get to there. Create growth opportunities and clear paths upward, promotional practices for your people to make sure that they know that they can move up in the organization. They don't have to necessarily leave the organization in order to find growth opportunities. And then cultivate emerging leaders. And that goes back to the leadership development program we talked about, which is building leaders that can support the organization longer term, not just the leaders who are in place right now, but the ones who could take their place if and when they end up leaving for whatever reason, retiring, finding another organization, another better fit. or just moving away and moving on with family and personal life, right? Because that happens as well. In terms of after someone leaves, create an effective transition plan. Building enough time and effort with that person to say, listen, let's try to make sure your team is supported and your successor is supported, because otherwise people are going to leave, right? You're going to have a high turnover situation where that person comes in to fill the shoes of the person before them, and they don't have a full picture of what that person did. So there are going to be gaps, and that person is not set up for success. Right? Select a successor, like I said. Make sure you know what you're doing when you select that person. Help that person to succeed by involving them as much as possible in the process. Support the successor once they're already in there, right? Once they're put into that position, so that they know what's involved. Whether that previous person, the incumbent, is involved in that situation or not, that's okay. And then you want to effectively create communications and change management. And that is communicate to that person, communicate to the teams, make sure everyone is up to date on what's happening and why it's happening. And so that they can also weigh in and say, listen, hey, here's what that person who left was doing with my team. And here's how we need to support in the future, right? It's also an opportunity to improve on what that person was doing as well. And then make use of the exit interview. The exit interview is often overlooked. If you wanted more information about that, check out the last video. I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is about a different topic that we can spend infinitely amount of time on. But the exit interview is extremely important, and most companies kind of just overlook it. All right, so let's move on to today's topic. A highly cohesive team is more effective than a highly skilled one. This is proven over and over and over again. This is a quote of mine. Actually, I say this all the time. And I found this to be true 99.99999% of the time. The only time that only the one time that it wasn't false, but it was just the highly skilled team already was cohesive, so it kind of balanced out, right? So consider this for a second as we talk about everything else we're talking about, right? This is going to be the lens through which we're looking at all the conversations today. So what are the basics of a good team? One is leadership, right? It starts and ends with leadership. Everything starts and ends with the leader of the team. Right? If you don't have a clear team leader, or you don't have at least the responsibility of that leadership role that is established, the team will suffer. And there are ways to make that a rotating role. If everyone's the same level, or if it's a matrix situation, you can rotate that if you want to. But whatever you do, formalize some kind of a leadership role. If you don't do that, there's going to be a leadership vacuum. There's going to be vying and fighting between the teams, between the team members to say, oh, I'm going to hear my voice, or you got to hear my voice, or whatever I'm saying is important. The team leader's responsibility is to set the goals, set the objectives of everyone talking about what they're doing, right? Understand what's going on, which leads to the next one, which is a unified goal or team charter. Now, a charter is something that's pretty formalized. It's something that, it's where you talk about operating procedures, things like that. Not every team needs that level of detail or that level of formality, but many teams do. And if you don't have that, some teams will suffer because of that situation. But absent an actual formal charter, you can just have a team goal or a set of goals the team is put together to accomplish. Oftentimes with IT teams, if you have a team that's going through a project, they have an outcome that they're trying to get to. That project is going to be that outcome for them. So you want to make sure you're specifying that. Sorry, I'm having trouble talking today. Specify that as much as possible, to the point where the team now has an ultimate goal that they're all working towards. Otherwise, like I said, you're going to have pushing and pulling in different directions. Different team members are going to be like, they have to, abide by their own organizations or whatever makes sense. If it's a matrix situation, if it's not a matrix situation, individuals still have their own goals. They still have their own aspirations and things that they want to do. And they might still feel slighted by certain situations. If you make sure you contextualize every conversation, every assignment, every discussion with, hey, this is the team goal and this is what we're working towards. And everything we do, everything we say, every action I as a leader take, or we as a team take, is in pursuit of that goal. That now takes away all of the emotions, all the nonsense that comes along with that, the politics that comes along with that. And now it becomes a team effort, a one team effort that's moving toward that direction, as opposed to egos and whatever else that comes into play. Clearly defined roles. This is one that people tend to miss a lot of times too, both the goals and the roles. And they rhyme, so I didn't mean to do that on purpose, but it does end up being something where it's easy to remember that way. You want to have a team that has goals and roles. The roles on the team can vary depending on what the team's goals are, right? But you want to have clearly defined swim lanes. So I know if I'm a member of the team, if I need to get this subject area over here covered, I know to talk to Susie. If this subject over here, I need to talk to Johnny, right? So I know who to talk to for different questions that I have, And if not, then I need to figure out what makes sense and talk to the leader about that. And then we get together as a team and say, okay, this is something we didn't necessarily plan for. We don't have a plan for in place. Who does it make sense to take ownership over this, right? This is where something like a RACI chart would really come in really handy in this situation. And for those of you who are not familiar with RACI charts, it's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, right? Those are the different levels of a RACI chart. And again, that's a whole other conversation for another day, but those kinds of things can really, really be helpful with teams in terms of dynamics and how to define roles, all right? When you do this, you want to play to people's strengths, all right? Culture of open feedback. This one should sound familiar for anyone who heard me talk 5 minutes ago or who's watched my previous webinar. That was about kind of the entire organization and how to fill the gaps when people leave. Because you want to build a culture of open feedback in the organization. That's the macro level, right? Now at the team level and the micro level, you want to build open feedback with your team members. Everyone should have a voice and everyone should feel like their voice is being heard, or at least that they can speak their mind and speak what their truths are, right? If I'm a member of the team, not team leader, but just a member of the team, and I see, hey, there's an opportunity to improve something here, you need to make that person, give that person the voice to be able to say that. And without any kind of repercussions, without any kind of slamming down or saying, hey, be quiet, that's not your place, or any of that kind of stuff. That's not the place for that. The team, there is a team leader, but that team leader is meant to facilitate discussions and push everything forward. They're not meant to silence voices and be the purveyor of politics. Okay, so make sure that everyone has a voice and everyone is able to do what they need to do and speak up about ways to improve, ways to change, those kind of things. And what are they seeing in general at team level? You want to have diverse points of view. This one also is missed a lot of times. Why do teams that have seemingly nothing in common get together so well and do so well? Because they each have their different voice, they each have their different lens, okay? When people are seeing everything through one lens, there's so much room for blind spots. Think about just driving a car for a moment, right? When you're driving with a passenger, what do you ask them when you're changing lanes? Hey, am I clear over there, right? Now, you don't necessarily need to ask them all the time. You have your mirrors, your blind spot mirrors, check those out, make sure that they're good to go. You can check your blind spots, fine, right? But if you don't necessarily know those blind spots are there, you have someone who has a different point of view. If everyone's sitting exactly where you're sitting, first of all, it's physically impossible. But second of all, if that was possible, if it was just a situation where everyone was sitting and had the same view as the driver, how much would be missed? How much extra work would the driver have to do to make sure that things are moving in directions they need to move in, right? So you want to get different points of view. You want to get points of view from the database team. You want to get points of view from, you know, the front end developers, the back end developers, in terms of IT, for example, right? In terms of other teams, you want to make sure that all the different teams are working together. The marketing team, the business team, the finance team. You see where these places, the legal team. You see where each one of these roles has an important point of view that needs to be shared. Be mindful of that. Also, strong relationships, and that's the last one I mentioned here, but that's a key one. And then again, that's one that people tend to overlook a lot of times because they think it's just a matter of putting people together and it's just going to work, right? You think about the all-star teams and the dream teams of of basketball world and whatnot, right? If you put all point guards on one team, for anyone who knows basketball, you put all of one particular role on one team, what's going to happen, right? They're not going to do that great per se. But on top of that, they also have different points of view, different backgrounds, right? The same way that they have different points of view, they'll be able to work together and be able to say, we work together as a team, we work together now, we know how to work together, and we work together more often, right? So now the strong relationships are there. You do team building activities. The team now knows where they sit, right? The team knows. I don't just know how to do my job, and I don't just know that person, whoever's there, going to do their job. I know how to work with Johnny. I know how to work with Susie. We know how to come up with each other's gaps and figure out where we work together. We know how to communicate better. We know how to come up with our goals and figure out what makes sense together. And we know how the other person works, right? We know what they need to get their work done. That's what team cohesion looks like. That's what the relationships look like. And that's honestly something that's done with team. It can be done with team building, with activities like that are targeted, but also to kind of comes with time, right? Obviously, a team working together for 10 years is going to be more cohesive and have stronger relationships than a team working together for a month or a week, right? But in terms of team building and things like that, you can actually facilitate that kind of strong relationship sooner than later by investing in the team development activities, okay? Now, in terms of how those activities work, how do you know how the team members work together? How do you know who they are and how they're going to respond to different things? Well, that's where assessments come in. All right, now there's different kinds of assessments. Some of these we're talking about today are going to be familiar to you, some may not. So we'll jump into the most common one that I hear of a lot of times, which is the MBTI, right? The MBTI is probably the most used / overused assessment in the world. And I say that at least in the US and Europe, right? A lot of folks look at the MBTI and they think of it as a definitive thing. First of all, no assessment is definitive in the sense that it doesn't tell you who you are or any of that kind of stuff. It tells you your tendencies, right? It tells you how you operate. It tells you how you operate more often than not. People tend to use it to define themselves by saying, I am an INTJ, I am an ESFP, right? Whatever those things are. You're not that thing. You just have a tendency for those different things, right? It's not a Boolean all the time. But I digress a little bit. The whole thing with the MBTI is it measures 4 different dimensions. One is introversion versus extroversion. One is sensing versus intuition. Another is thinking versus feeling. And the last one is going to be judging and perceiving, right? What those things mean is a little bit subtle, a little bit different than what they may sound like, but it measures different kinds of interactions. Essentially, how do you communicate effectively with different people? How do you operate? What are your beliefs? What are your things like that you can kind of tap into and say, how do I appeal to this person? And how do I know this person understands what's coming from me, right? That's what the MBTI, that's the kind of awareness the MBTI can give folks. For a deeper dive in any of these, actually, like I said, I'm happy to have more offline conversations about it because there's so much you could talk about any one of these assessments by themselves. So covering 4 here is going to take me some time. The DISC is the next one. That's a pretty common one as well. Now, the DISC is going to be talking about dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness, right? This one is used a lot of times in trainings in terms of how to make sure that people are getting the trainings and working to their natural styles a little more. But you see how there can be some overlap between the MBTI and the awareness you get from the DISC. The DISC is also, like I said, pretty commonly used. It's used a lot of times in sales trainings, things like that, but it can be very effective in understanding, again, how do I communicate with this person? How do I know that they understand what I'm saying, right? Now we're getting to the more kind of complex and deeper dive assessments. We're talking about the Hogan assessments, right? The Hogan assessments is a pretty powerful tool, and it's not often used by the average person, right? It's going to be used in leadership context or in context of people working, at a higher level. And so when people are looking at the Hogan, there are 3 different Hogan assessments, right? You can see them here. The HPI is the bright side, the HDS is the dark side, and then the MVPI is the inside. What does that mean? Well, the HPI is the Hogan personality inventory. It tells you how do you operate when you're doing the best work you could possibly do, right? When you're lit up, when you're doing what you're doing, how do you operate really well? Where are your strengths, right? HDS is the Hogan developmental survey, right? That talks about where do you go when you're stressed out, when things are not going your way. How do you operate? Where's kind of your dark place, right? Where do you go when you're not doing your best work, when you're doing kind of your worst, right? That's what that assesses for you. And then the MVPI is the motives, values, and performance indicator. I think P is performance. I always forget that one. But it basically talks about your values. Who are you at your core? What motivates you? What gets you up in the morning, right? Are you motivated by money? Are you motivated by doing good in the world? Are you motivated by just taking care of people? Those are the kind of things that looks at. And that can be really, really valuable when you're talking about assessing a leader or building up the teams to say, okay, these people need to work together. How do we make sure that they actually complement each other in a way that makes sense? How do we make sure that their strengths work together, as opposed to saying that they are going to be butting heads all the time and saying that, oh, well, this is going to work that way or that's going to work this way. It really helps you get a fuller picture of people and how they work. Lastly is the leadership circle profile. This one is, I actually love this assessment personally because it really gives a full picture of a leader. And it really is primarily for leaders and managers. And this is actually the example of the report that you get at the end of that assessment. The way it is, it measures 27 different dimensions of leadership. The top is what happens when you're creative as a leader. The bottom is what happens when you're reactive as a leader. Kind of similar to the Hogan in terms of the bright side and the dark side of things, right? But what I like about this is it's a 360 assessment. So it requires you to have people from different points of view giving feedback on your work and how you're dealing with different things. It gives you a real full picture of that leader and what they're doing. And so it really kind of dives deeper into who that person is, gives them an idea of where they see themselves, as well as where they see others and where the gap is between those 2 things. So you can see how these 4 assessments, I wouldn't put them all together and do all of them. That would be overkill, frankly, but you can pick one or the other and see which one makes sense for you. Just a word of caution, if you are planning on using any kind of assessment for hiring, be really, really cautious and mindful about that. There are ways to really mess yourself up as an organization and open yourself up to some lawsuits. So if you're going to use any of these, please do, for hiring, please do consult a professional about these things. The Hogan and the LCP, the Leadership Circle Profile, do require that you work with a professional who's certified to deliver them. The other two you can do kind of more on your own. They technically are as well, but there are more options for that one. But like I said, please do consult a professional before you use it for hiring, if you plan to use anything for hiring at all. All right. And the MBTI I actually do not use for hiring at all, because that's actually cause lawsuits. All right. So what now? After all that, take some time to define the team goals, right? That's something you want to make sure you're doing. Set the direction of the team. Make sure the leader's empowered to do that. Team goals will help weather storms and potential conflicts, because they inevitably will come up. There's going to be territory battles, things like that. And you want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on with the team goals. Use leadership and personality assessments to your benefit, right? Whether you're hiring someone or whether you already have a team in place, it's helpful to really look at those kind of things and say, okay, how does the team work together? How can we make this team work better together? How do we understand each person more effectively? And then when the team gets that awareness, now they can say, okay, I know that Susie is operates in a certain way, but they're more extroverted. They like the interaction situation. They like being out in the open and talking about stuff, versus, Johnny over there is more of an introvert, prefers the time alone to process things and make sure that he knows what he's doing. We got to make sure we operate with them differently and interact with them in different ways to make sure that their specific needs and specific strengths are being catered to as a team, right? Assess and recognize strengths. Again, back to the assessments, but when you're thinking about the roles and responsibilities, really focus on the strengths of your employees, right? And the team members themselves. What kind of strengths are going to work together better, right? If you have two people who have the similar strengths, are they in roles that will complement each other, or are they in roles where they're going to butt heads? Make sure that those things are accounted for, right? Open communication and feedback. I cannot say enough about this. Honestly, I really, really can't. I said it all last session, and I'm going to say it again a couple more times today. This is essential to any team or any organization. If you don't have open communication and feedback loops available for people, you're not going to succeed as an organization, not long term. You may get some stuff done. It's frankly, I'll tell you honestly, it's luck. All right. Because you're not going to see your awareness yet. You're not going to have awareness of the team. You're not going to be able to understand, where are my blind spots, where are opportunities to improve, how to make sure everyone's being actualized and that they're doing their best work, right? Focus on building relationships is going to be the last thing. You're brought onto the team for your skills. We're already really good at assessing skills, honestly. Your organization probably is in a place where it knows exactly how to assess people and their skill level, what they're doing. Focus on relationships now, right? I'm not saying ignore the skills. That's not what I'm saying, because you're brought in. What I mean is you're hired for your skills, right? Make part of the hiring process personality and relationships and how they interact with the team, but then make team assignments on how they work with the team built on relationships a little more as well. And then encourage your team to do activities together. I cannot stress how different the work is when you enjoy who you're working with, or when you at least know them, understand them, and respect them, versus just working with essentially a stranger who does X job. If the only thing you know about your team members is their role and maybe that they're married, there's more work to be done there. All right. Now, I mentioned that I was going to do a bonus mention of another assessment, and that's going to be called the IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory. That is an assessment that can be done individually or as a team in general. And that really brings into that whole diverse point of view concept. It really assesses people's ability to interact with different people with different ideas. How do you deal with conflict at its core, right? And that's a really powerful assessment to mention. I didn't mention it in the other ones because it's more of a team assessment as a whole. I wanted to throw it as a bonus if we had time, which we did. So I hope that's helpful for you guys. That is today's webinar. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed this session today. I hope it was valuable for you. Please do reach out if you have any questions at all, if you want to set up a one-to-one with me. And yeah, happy to chat with anyone about these things so we can talk some more. Okay. Thanks so much, guys. Take care. Tune in again in 2 weeks. We'll have another one where we're talking about imposter syndrome and why that's really debilitating and how to deal with it. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Stay safe. Have a great rest of your week.